Community currencies, an ideology of abundance. Our achievements in science and technology have stretched our Western consciousness of time and place and ushered in a sense of global community. We're connected to other people in new ways, drawn more closely into a web of relationships that span the globe. Our American penchant for efficient, around-the-clock access to consumer goods and services now spreads across borders and oceans, day and night. At the same time, there's a fragmented sense of identity in our society where family and community are loosely defined, and a high percentage of communication is dependent on technology. Where neighbors once gathered to talk about common interests and concerns, today friends are apt to text messages or post photos of their activities on Facebook. Gathering places that sustain the identity of its citizens, like Sunday afternoon on the sidewalk, provided a time and place where diverse parts of a community could come together and hold a conversation with a shared sense of participation and responsibility. Chet Bowers is one person who's calling for a revitalization of such a common time and place. He calls it the cultural commons. Such a commons could hold the cultural wisdom of a community and provide a means for sustaining that way of being. Revitalizing the commons is a return to intentional care of a community, a sustainable approach to the ecology, or connections between people and their environment. In this sense, the commons refers to the people who live in a particular bioregion and the natural resources upon which their lives depend: arable land, clean air, water, plants, and animals. Consumer-dependent Western economies have derogated and exploited natural resources in the process of generating the goods that the media touts as necessary for a good life. Bowers refers to this as double-bind thinking, where the very process of progressive development destroys the underlying ecological practices that are necessary to sustain it. The language of such a market economy supports an ideology built on competition, because entitled consumerism drives a continual striving for goods and services. If these goods and services are limited or perceived to be scarce, perpetual striving escalates to anxiety and the exploitation of natural resources or less powerful individuals. Those living in fear and anxiety of scarcity have no time or energy for the common good. Language that supports an ideology of abundance, on the other hand, provides the framework necessary for cooperation, trust, and collective responsibility for the common good. The idea of intentional care for the common good, or practices of the cultural commons, might look like teaching skills of crafts that are not necessarily monetized, sharing of intergenerational knowledge, or an effort to care for natural resources in public places. These practices reinforce the community's identity as one with abundant resources in terms of time, energy, experience, good ideas, and collective responsibility. This way of being can support the work necessary to locate and integrate the specific resources within that community. One cultural commons practice is the creation of a local currency. More than 200 community currency systems have been launched in the United States in the last 20 years, the oldest of which is the Ithaca Hour, established in 1991. The largest is Berkshire's, with $4.3 million currently circulating in their region. Economists measure the health of a community by the circulation of money. The more transactions, the higher the circulation number, and the greater the stability of that local economy. Local industries and community development programs can increase circulation, but eventually those dollars migrate out to multinational corporations. A local currency, however, keeps circulation totally within the local economy. An example currency can be found in Pittsboro, North Carolina, a rural town of nearly 4,000 people. The idea was to safeguard local jobs and production, reducing dependency on generic big box stores and distributing wealth more evenly among local business owners. The plenty would increase awareness of local resources and reduce shipping materials and fuel needed to transport goods from distant locations. And the use of plenties would support the community values of neighborliness, generosity, and self-reliance, as they were traded in face-to-face retail interactions. All these outcomes point to a sustainable cultural commons practice. In 2002, active, forward-thinking citizens launched the Piedmont Local Economy Tender, or Plenty. The notes were professionally designed with beautiful watercolor images that honor the landmarks, wildlife, and cultural attributes of the region. On the bottom of each bill is the slogan, "In each other we trust," which refers to neighbors and the community as a whole. Plenties can be exchanged one for U.S. dollars at the local bank. Currently, $16,000 worth of plenties have been printed in Pittsboro, although not all of them are in circulation. One of the Pittsburghs who has been active in the conception, implementation, and promotion of the Plenty is Lyle Estel. Lyle runs Piedmont Biofuels, a small renewable energy company that produces biodiesel. He's also known around town for his books. The use of a community currency has not effectively transitioned from the alternative subculture to the mainstream, however, and this has limited the visibility and success of the Plenty. In an informal interview of business owners on the main street, there is a continuum from not knowing of the Plenty to being aware but not accepting it as payment, to an eagerness to support its use as a community currency. Pittsburgh residents who use the Plenty, however, are a culture-sharing group with language and behaviors negotiating shared responsibility for the common good. As an example, Lyle opened a business downtown that was bordered by a long brick wall. He and local artist Clyde Jones decided it was ugly. Lyle says, "We decided on a whim that if I were to get the wall painted blue and provide some scaffolding, he would paint a mural on it," which we did. Tammy rounded up school children, the local hardware store's paint vendor donated the paint, and off we went. The mural went up in fine fashion. Someone called the police, thinking it was a violation of the local sign ordinance, but when the chief of police came to inspect, he thought it looked fine. An argument could be between the practice of a cultural commons, such as the Pittsburgh Plenty, and communities of practice, as described by Jean Lave in her theory of situated learning. One principle of situated learning is natural evolution, resulting from a process of iterative action-reflection cycles, which in the case of the Plenty began with the conversation of neighbors around the kitchen table and grew into the first issue of a community currency. With time and experience, however, the currency was adjusted and later reissued. It was launched as a formal membership cooperative and continues as an informal grassroots effort. A broad range of perspectives is evidenced in the different businesses that accept Plenties. Angelina's Greek Kitchen, the Chatham Marketplace Food Co-op, and Piedmont Biofuels are among the long-standing supporters of the Plenty. The value of maintaining a community currency is seen in the economic health of a community, as well as in the relationships of those who participate in trading Plenties. They are shifting their way of being in the community. This behavior is a manifestation of Bauer's concept of a cultural commons mentioned earlier, the intrapersonal connections between people and between those people and the bioregion that sustains their community. The quality of the learning in situated learning, however, is dependent on the quality of the relationships among members of the community. Newcomers learn from those that are more closely connected, and tacit knowledge becomes explicit as shared experience evolves into a local epistemology. That collaboration, however, is no small task in a society that places a premium on individualism and competition. Albert Bandura's social cognitive learning theory pairs well with situated learning concepts, in that the behavior that is observed and imitated in a community of practice is dependent on cognitive processes. Behavioral choices are a function of the interaction of an individual and their environment, and then the reciprocal influence of the environment shapes the learning of the individual. Thus, the three components of Bandura's model have the potential to create a community of practice where an ideology of abundance prevails. On the other hand, those three components can manifest the double-bind ideology of progress as a spiral that fragments the community into individualism and competition without regard for the bioregion that sustains them. The question might be as simple as, who are we listening to? Do media and institutions determine our reality? The reciprocal interaction of Bandura's theory is evidenced in the continual stream of commercials, for example, where we model behavior observed on television and buy the products we believe will make us happy. Or could the definition of the good life come from the engagement of community members pursuing an ideology of abundance? It takes time and good conversation to engage and understand complex connections between a community and their environment. As long as we're busy, swamped by the demands of securing a life for ourselves, we can more easily justify begging off from responsibility for the commons. Or we can shift our collective way of being. The use of a community currency in Pittsburgh is part of a larger movement toward a healthy, ecologically intelligent town. For example, there's a thriving artistic collaborative, music festivals, and a commercial biodiesel facility that fuels 400 families with alternative energy. There's a food co-op, a slow money loan program, and an educational partnership with the local community college. The interdependency of all these elements form a network of community wealth that is ecologically intelligent and sustainable, rather than dependent on a consumerist exploitive way of being. Although these initiatives began with a subculture of the community, they are developing democratically and spreading organically over time. By virtue of that fact, the progress is slow and often messy. Living within the limits of the natural system, however, requires less hours spent working to pay for monetized goods and services and affords opportunity to engage in activities that sustain a sense of community. The soil of the Pittsburgh community is healthy enough to support the growth of an ideology of abundance, which produces fruit for their common good.